When I pushed open the warped door and smelled old wood and dust, my breath caught because I knew this was not an accident. The neighbors had laughed all week, saying my grandpa left me nothing but a crooked shed and a pile of junk. I told myself I would sweep it out, lock it up, and be done. I even said out loud that it was only a room with walls. I told myself it was just shadows and old boards, and that was the end of it. But nature had a different plan. The air inside was cool, damp, almost clean the way earth smells after rain. My steps echoed too loud for a space this small. I shifted my weight, and the floor spoke back with a hollow thud. Not normal. I pressed my heel again. The same dull drum rose from under the planks, as if the shed had a chest and I was hearing its breath. My heart stalled in that quiet. I crouched and ran my hand along a seam I had not seen before. There was a ring of iron, cold and stubborn. A hatch. I do not know why my hands shook. I do not know why I said Grandpa's name like a password. The hinges complained when I pulled, and earth air poured up at me. Not rot, not mold, soil, stone, night. I lowered my head through the square and listened. No wind, no water, just a stillness so dense it pressed on my tongue. I aimed my phone's light, and the beam fell into a round of dirt and rock, like a throat leading down. I could make out shelves built into the wall, a shovel, a tin bowl, a line of something pale that could have been roots. Then my light slid across the far corner and stopped. 2 points caught it and held it. Eyes, not glass, not nails. Eyes that answered light with light. They did not flinch. They did not dart away. They looked back, steady, calm, as if I had returned late to a place that already knew me. My first thought was simple and wrong. A big rat, a stray dog, some farm thing that fell in and could not climb out. I whispered something foolish like hello, as if language could make a bridge. The eyes blinked once, slow and heavy, and in that blink I felt my breath snag. A rat does not blink like that. A dog does not hold its fear like that. I felt the floor under my knees again, the coarse grit, the old sawdust, the little splinters starting into my palm. I should have been afraid only. Instead, I felt two things at once, fear and a strange respect that rose like heat. I waited for a growl or a rustle. Nothing, only a soft shift, a hush like cloth sliding over stone, and then stillness. My light found the edge of a feather caught on a protruding nail near the hatch. I touched it without meaning to. It was real, downy at one end, strong at the other. My mind said coincidence. My body said listen. I lowered the light again and spoke my grandpa's name a second time. The eyes leaned into the beam, not away, and the room around me faded. I heard my own pulse. I tasted metal. I felt the old door behind me as if it had closed by itself. The pupils widened, round and black, then tightened until they were thin, gold circling dark. I do not know how long we held that line between us. A heartbeat, a dozen. Time slipped and came back in pieces. It did a small thing that shook me more than if it had lunged. It tilted its head, not to measure me for danger, not to find a way out. It tilted like it recognized a tune. It tilted like it was setting me into focus. That tiny angle pushed a beam of light across the wall, and the shelves threw their short shadows. I swallowed. I could feel the skin at the back of my neck wake up. I should have closed the hatch. I should have called someone, anyone. I should have laughed at myself and walked away. I told myself again that my eyes were tired, that it was only a trick of light on glass, and that was the end of it. But the stillness below refused my excuse. A breath rose from the dark, not mine, not wind, a living breath warmed by its own body. It reached my face, and for a second I thought it carried the faintest trace of clean feathers, of field, of cold. My light wavered. The eyes did not. They held me the way you hold a name in your mouth before you speak it. My chest hurt in the best and worst way, like I had been running and praying at the same time. I wanted to cry and laugh and apologize for something I could not name. The sound that finally came from that corner was not a snarl. It was a low, rounded note, a sound shaped for the night, a sound that gave me the feeling of an old promise being remembered. It looked at me like I belonged to it. I know how wild that sounds. I know how foolish. But that is the truth of what I felt in the first minutes under that hatch. I had come to sweep out a shed. I had stepped into a secret that carried my grandpa's breath. I had found eyes that waited with the patience of winter. I did not yet know what they were. I only knew that whatever watched me was not lost. It was not trapped. It was choosing to stay. I set my palm on the rim of the opening to steady myself, and a sliver went in deep. I stared at the tiny bead of blood on my fingertip like it belonged to a stranger. I pressed that finger to the floor and left a small red print, as if to mark that I was real. The eyes blinked again, slow and even, and for a second I felt seen in a way I had not felt since my grandpa left the world. I thought that had to be the whole of it, a scare and a story. I thought I would close the hatch, lock the door, and laugh like the neighbors. If only I had known this was only the beginning. I went back the next day with a flashlight and a steadier hand. The hatch gave the same tired groan, and the cool breath of earth climbed up my sleeves. I set my boots on the ladder rungs one by one, wood whispering under my weight, and sent the beam ahead of me like a white finger tracing the dark. Dirt walls, a shelf of jars, the tin bowl I had noticed. Then the corner that had held those eyes opened into a shape that was more than eyes. He sat there as if the room belonged to him. Wide head, heavy body, feathers packed tight like layered bark, the faint rise and fall of a chest that did not rush. The ear tufts stood like small, calm flames. His feet were fists of pale claw, loose but ready. He did not flinch at the light. He did not shuffle. He did not try to climb. He watched me the way a porch light watches a door. He watched me like he had been waiting. I stopped halfway down and let the beam settle on the dirt near him so I would not blind him. His pupils changed size like a breath, and he turned his head, not with a jerk, but with a slow, exact swivel, as if placing me on a map he already knew. There was a scrape of grit as I stepped to the floor. My chest tapped hard like it wanted out, but my feet went forward anyway. He looked at me like I was his own. It landed in me like a bell. Not tame, not begging, not broken, known. My mouth went dry. I said my grandpa's name again, and the owl blinked once like a nod, and then again like a yes kept simple. I saw the tin bowl up close, and the truth of it tugged hard. Tiny bones, a scatter of fur, a few smooth stones like someone had washed them. The shelf held a folded rag, a jar with seeds, a little knife with a wrapped handle. My grandpa had been down here, not once, many times. I lowered myself onto an overturned crate because my knees were less steady than I wanted them to be. He made a tiny adjustment on his perch, a quiet rocking step, and the dirt under his talons barely disturbed. The smell of him reached me then, not sharp, not foul, but a wild, clean thread, feather, field, frost. He did not ask for food. He did not look at the bowl. He kept looking at me. I whispered that I would not hurt him. The words were foolish and honest. He tilted his head. It felt like he was listening not to the words, but to the weight behind them. I remembered the neighbors laughing, the talk about junk and rot, and I felt heat rise in my face that had nothing to do with the cellar air. I knew my grandpa would not leave a living thing to starve. I knew he would keep a promise even if no one else saw it. The owl drew a breath I could see more than hear and let out a short sound that startled me because it was not the long rolling hoot I had expected. It was a round, soft note, a single call shaped like a question and an answer together. It did not bounce off the walls. It filled the room and settled, and I had the sudden, strange thought that it was not meant for me at all, but for someone or something beyond me. I stood without meaning to, and he followed the line of my rising with that smooth swivel that made my skin prickle. He stepped once closer and stopped, leaving a polite space like a door half open. My hand lifted, then fell, then lifted again. I did not reach for him. He did not reach for me. We held a small distance, as if it were a fragile bridge we had both agreed to trust. A draft slid across the back of my neck and carried a thin dust that glittered in the beam. On the far wall, a feather was caught in a crack, trembling. I touched it with a finger and it came free. The shaft was firm, the vein soft, and I felt the thought land with a quiet surety. My grandpa had shared this room, this air, this careful peace. He had not told anyone. He had not needed to. The owl spoke again, the same brief note, and this time there was the faintest answer from above, too soft to be a voice, too steady to be pipes. It could have been a memory. It could have been wind. It lodged just behind my ribs and would not leave. He shifted his weight, and one wing loosened by a finger's width, not spreading, only easing, and the light stuttered along the fine bars of feather. I knew nothing about wings, but I knew this was not fear. I told myself it was simple. A wild bird had blundered in and found a quiet place, and my grandpa, being who he was, had put out a bowl, and that was the whole of it. I told myself to fix the hatch and call someone with gloves and a net. I told myself the right thing was to correct the accident and set the world back in order. I decided it was just a coincidence. A bird had slipped in and gotten trapped, and that was all. But even as I stood to go, he lifted his head and shaped that short call a third time, and the sound went through me like a wire pulled tight. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. I felt my throat close. I felt the shape of a door I could not see swing wider. I did not yet know what he was calling. I did not yet know who was meant to answer. I only knew I could not pretend this was nothing and walk away. I told myself I would only check the shelves and leave. I said I would set down a fresh bowl of water, close the hatch, and go back to the daylight. I even said out loud that I understood now, a kind old man, a hungry wild bird, and a quiet truce under the floor. I thought that was all there was to it. But the room kept a breath I had not heard yet. I brought the flashlight lower and saw the bowl clearly for the first time. It was old tin, bent on one edge, with a thin seam of rust like a scar. Inside lay tiny bones light as twigs, a drift of husk and grain, and a few smooth seeds that looked hand-sorted. I did not need anyone to tell me. My grandpa had fed him, not once, again and again. I felt a small sting of shame for the way I had laughed in my kitchen at the idea of a shed full of junk. This was not junk. This was a promise you keep in the dark where no one can praise you for it. I lifted the bowl and felt the shape of his hands in the dents. Under it, dust had kept a clean ring, like a picture frame. I slid the bowl back into that ring the way you set a photograph straight. My breath fogged the beam. The owl sat the same way, patient, as if watching me remember something I had been told already and had chosen to forget. On the top shelf, a corner of paper lifted in the draft from my own moving. I reached up and eased it free. The paper was yellow and soft, the edges feathery, the ink a tired brown that still held his hand. He did not waste words. He never did. The note said, in my grandpa's neat, stubborn print, "Do not chase him away. He knows more than people." I read it twice because my eyes stung. I read it a third time because the room felt smaller and bigger at once. I heard my heart, slow and heavy, because he had written it for me. He had written it to reach across the distance between his last day and this one. Before I could put the paper back, wings opened and the air moved. The sound was not loud. It was full. It had weight. He came off the floor with that effortless lift only wild wings can make. For a beat, my body tried to go two ways at once. My knees wanted to fold. My shoulders wanted to rise. He passed so close I felt the wake of him on my face, a ribbon of cold and clean, and then he settled on the shoulder of the beam above me like he had always sat there. He faced me, not the hatch, not the wall. His head made that slow half-turn and stopped when his eyes found mine. We both held very still, as if the floor between us were water. My mouth went dry. My palms sweated. My mind measured the curve of his beak and the size of his talons and did the quick math of hurt. My chest did a different math and found awe. There was something human in his gaze, like gratitude. I could not move away from it. I could not look away from it. It landed on my skin and stayed. It asked for nothing. It gave me back my own face, steadier than I felt, and I did not know how to carry that. He did a tiny thing that felt like a word. He dipped his head, not jerky, not nervous, deliberate, like manners. I felt foolish for standing there with an old note in my fist and my mouth open. I folded the paper and slid it to my pocket like a small relic. I said thank you to the dark, to him, to my grandpa, to whoever had arranged this meeting. The owl did not blink for a long few breaths, and when he did, the blink read like an answer I was afraid to put into speech. I put my hand on the ladder because my legs wanted a next step, any step. The beam above creaked under his weight, and I flinched at the thought of him falling, which was silly because he lived on air. He lifted one foot and set it down again, careful as a person trying not to wake a child. I realized then that my fear had changed shape. I was still afraid, but not of him. I was afraid of failing whatever this was. I thought maybe the right thing was to back away, to leave him the room and my promise, to come again with more grain, to do this the way my grandpa had done it. I thought the moment had already given me all it had to give. I told myself that his flight and the note were the whole message, and I had received it. I almost turned, but the note's last words burned like a small coal in my pocket. He knows more than people. The beam hummed a little beneath him, as if there was a sound too low for my ear. His chest rose and fell once, measured. He kept looking at me, not asking, not warning, waiting. There was a space on the shelf I had not checked yet, a dark rectangle against the back wall that my light had skipped. I could see the hint of string, the edge of a spine, something that might be a book or might be nothing at all. I did not reach for it, not yet. I stood under the watch of his eyes and felt the shape of the next minute gather like weather. I do not know why I whispered that I would do as I was told. I do not know why I believed he could hear my promise and hold me to it. I told myself, again, that this was enough for one day, that I would close the hatch and breathe in the sun and come back when my hands were steadier. I thought the moment had folded shut, but even as I placed my foot on the bottom rung, I felt him lean the smallest degree toward me, a weight like a nod pressed into the air, and I understood I had not yet learned what the dark meant to show me. He did something I did not expect a wild bird to do. He opened one wing just enough to catch my light and gave it a single, deliberate beat toward the far wall. Not a startle, not a warning, a gesture. I froze, told myself I was reading too much into it, that wings are wings and walls are walls, and that was the end of it. But the wing dipped again, same angle, same aim, as if he were pointing. I walked the beam of the flashlight along the stones where he had indicated. Dust lifted in a slow veil. The mortar line looked unbroken until, halfway up from the floor, the beam snagged on a hairline gap. I pressed my palm there. The stone was cool, but the edge gave a little under my fingers as if it had been moved before. I wanted to call someone. I wanted to leave it alone. I also wanted to know what my grandpa had hidden where only a creature with night eyes could find it. The owl adjusted his feet and made no sound. He watched me with that steady, measuring calm that felt like a hand on my back. I set the light between my teeth, wedged my fingertips into the seam, and worried the stone loose. Behind it, darkness. I reached in and touched canvas, dry and stiff, a niche. I pulled out a wrapped bundle tied with twine that snapped with a tired sigh. For a moment, I just held it, because my hands had started to shake. Inside were old things that belonged to him: a small pocket knife, a strand of twine, a faded photograph of snow stacked to the sill, and a notebook the size of a hand, the cover worn smooth by years of opening. I opened it where it wanted to open. His handwriting met me like his voice. The page began without greeting. He saved my life in winter. I gave him shelter and food. I had to sit down. The crate took my weight with a creak. The owl was still above me, close enough that I could sense his breath moving the air. I read the words again, slower. Saved my life in winter. I saw it without wanting to. My grandpa, old and stubborn, the kind of cold that bites the bones, a storm that closes roads, and a bird that does not leave. The next lines spoke of long nights, and a bowl refilled, and a door left open just enough. He had written dates here and there, seasons spelled out in his careful print. This was not a day or a week. This was years. The wing that had pointed toward the wall folded neatly. He hopped a short measure closer on the beam, then steadied, as if to mark that this reading mattered. Fear climbed my throat and softened into something else. I felt the old house above us, the fields beyond it, the winter he had seen and kept. I could hear the neighbors' laughter again and felt it go thin in my ears. I thought it was just a shed. It was a chapel of trust. I turned a page and found a sentence underlined. Do not chase him away. He knows more than people. The echo of the scrap I had found earlier made my chest ache. Under that, in smaller letters, as if he had leaned in close to write them, if he calls, you listen. I touched the ink with the back of my knuckle the way you test a bruise. I did not want to cry in front of a bird. I also did not want to pretend that my grandpa had not just spoken straight through time and the floor and my own stubborn common sense. The owl shifted again. He lowered his head and lifted it slowly, like a nod that belonged to more than this room. The flashlight hummed in my teeth. I set it down and let the beam shine up the wall. He blinked once, twice, and then did another strange thing. He gave a single soft beat of his wing toward the niche again, a quiet insistence, a reminder that there might be more. I felt in the hollow and found a second, thinner packet. Inside lay a short pencil worn almost to nothing, and a page torn from the back of the notebook. On it, my grandpa had drawn a simple sketch: the shed, the tree line, a shallow curve like a path, and an X set near the creek. No words, no arrows, just a small truth left for someone who would come here and find it. I wanted to close the book, fold the canvas, and put every piece back the way I had found it. I wanted to keep the moment whole and unbroken and safe. The owl held me with his eyes, and that wish became something else, a vow I had not planned to make. He looked at me with a patience I had only ever seen in people who loved me. I told myself the story was complete now: a bird, a winter, a kind man, a cache of memories, and a granddaughter who stumbled into them. I told myself I could climb out, wash my hands, and lock the door with a full and honest heart. But even as I thought it, he exhaled a small, rounded note, the same one as before, and the sound settled into the open pages like a seal. I slid the notebook into my coat. I left the pencil in the niche and pressed the stone back until it fit. My palm came away with a thin veil of dust. I could feel the map burning a quiet place against my ribs. I stood under the beam where he waited, and I said out loud that I would not chase him away. I said I would listen. He tilted his head, that tiny angle that started everything, and I knew this was not finished. There was a mark near the creek I had not seen yet. There was a call I would have to answer. That night the shed woke me before the clock could. A thin thud, a soft rush, a hush like wings against wood. I told myself it was wind and mice and nothing else, that I could turn my face to the wall and sleep. I even smiled in the dark at my own nerves and said, "This is over." But the sound came again, closer, and the air in the hall felt cold, and my name rose in my throat as if someone had spoken it. I took the flashlight and crossed the yard barefoot because boots felt too slow. The hatch groaned a warning, and I opened it anyway. He was there, a low tower in the corner, and the room moved around him. He struck the air with his wings once, not wild, not trapped, a heavy, chosen beat that stirred the dust into glitter. He made that short, rounded call and looked at the opening, then back at me, then at the opening again. It was not panic, it was a summons. I set the ladder aside and pushed the outside door wide. He lifted without effort and passed me so close my hair rose. He cleared the lintel like it was something he did every night, and then he did the strangest, simplest thing. He waited. On the fence post he turned and fixed me with the same patient stare he had given me in the cellar, letting the seconds stretch until my feet obeyed. I stepped into the dark because he had asked me to. He took the lead like a lantern that carried its own night. He flew low over the path and climbed to the cottonwood and paused, a dark shape against darker branches, then forward again, a few beats, a glide, a look over his shoulder that was not human and somehow felt like an invitation. I kept close enough to hear the cut of his wings through the cold. The moon was a thin coin behind clouds. The field lay in a slow silver you could taste. He angled us toward the creek I had traced with my finger on that drawn map. The world narrowed to the sound of water under ice and the whisper of feather on air. He dropped suddenly and vanished into the small trees along the bank. My heart stuttered and then ran. I slipped and caught myself and slid again, and by the time I reached him, my legs were shaking. He stood not on a post now, but on the ground, a dark, full presence beside a shape that did not belong to river stones. When my beam found it, the cry caught behind my teeth. A fawn lay on its side, chest working too fast, one leg bent under the body wrong the way you feel even before you see. There was a thin line of wire curled round the hoof and a long scrape along the flank where panic had done its damage. He looked at me, then at the fawn, then at me again. He showed me another creature's pain as if he had trusted me with the most precious thing. My hands were clumsy and sure at the same time. I said I was here. I said it to the fawn, to him, to the ice, to my grandpa. The little body trembled under my palm, warm and wild and smelling of leaf and milk and fear. I kept my voice low so the night would not break. I took off my scarf and slid it under the neck. I kept the light soft. The wire bit my fingers, and I hated it for being strong. He shifted once and opened his wings enough to make a shelter over us both, and the creek air lost its bite. I worked the wire free because it was that, or let it win. The fawn bleated once, shocked and small. I swallowed hard and talked nonsense the way you do with babies and skittish horses, every word a thread. The owl did not move. He did not flinch at the sound. He kept that roof of wing until the last turn of wire slid loose and fell into my hand. The leg was wrong, but freed. Relief hit me so fast my knees went weak and I had to sit in the frozen mud to keep from falling. For a breath, I believed the scene had closed. We would back away, he would fold, the fawn would rise like a miracle, and that would be the end. But the body on the ground tried to stand and could not. It kicked once and cried out, and something in me cracked with it. I called the wildlife line with a voice I barely recognized and gave them words that felt too small, for what the night had asked. I told them creek and fence and old cottonwood. I told them there was a fawn and he was not alone. The woman on the line said to keep warm on the body and wait. I put my coat over the ribs and let my hands be steady because my grandpa would have wanted them steady. The owl lowered his wings slowly, like trust, and stepped back to the branch above us. He looked down with a gaze that did not judge and did not beg. It held. Time drifted sideways until the truck lights bent through the trees. The men moved with quiet boots and practiced hands. They did not say much. They did not look long at the shadow in the branches. We lifted the little one and set the leg straight as best we could and carried him to the warmth. I felt nothing and then everything. I felt mud in my socks and sweat between my shoulder blades and a lightness in my chest that hurt. They asked who called, and I said I did. They asked how I found him, and I looked up. The owl was a dark mark on the sky, eyes catching our lamps and throwing them back. I said, "He showed me." The men nodded like the world was sometimes like this and drove away into it. I stood by the creek and the map in my pocket burned like a coal. He flew down and landed on the fence post again, closer than before, and for the first time, I did not think he was testing me. I knew he was measuring whether I would keep walking. He had brought me to a wound and asked me to act, and my hands had done what they could. I felt fear and gratitude fight each other in my throat and settle into one soft, shaking thing. If your heart is holding its breath right now, you understand. Subscribe if you believe nature still speaks. I tell these stories because they are true and because they change the way we see the world. He gave a single, round call that answered itself, and somewhere in the trees, a soft echo returned. I thought we were done, but he lifted again and circled once over the creek, then headed deeper into the line of black, not toward home, not toward the shed. He looked back, that impossible half-turn, and I knew this was only the first question. I did not know what he would ask next. I only knew I would follow. He came back with me as if we had always shared a road. I crossed the yard with my coat still damp from the creek, and he floated at shoulder height, keeping pace, a quiet shadow that made its own rules. At the shed, he skimmed the doorframe and slipped inside like a breath returning to a lung. I followed with the flashlight low, afraid to break whatever thin thread held between us. Down in the cellar, he took the beam again, the same place where his claws had lined their small half-moons in the wood. He settled and watched while I rinsed the old bowl, wiping rust with the hem of my sleeve until my fingers stung. I set clean water the way my grandpa must have, with 2 small stones in the bottom, for no reason except that he had done it that way. The owl did not rush to drink. He kept his eyes on me, steady, measuring, as if counting the truth in my hands. It felt less and less like a bird and more like a keeper of the place. The shed no longer read as scrap and dust. It held itself like a room someone had blessed. Even the dirt smelled different, not musty but alive, like a root under snow. When I whispered "good boy" without thinking, shame burned my cheeks because he belonged to no one, and yet he looked at me as if my voice had put a piece of the world back where it belonged. By noon, a neighbor leaned on the fence and called out that my grandpa had been a crackpot, and I was following in his tracks. He laughed about owls and omens and people who talk to themselves. I nodded to keep the peace and felt the heat climb my neck. The words slid over me, and still, they stuck, and I hated that they did. I wanted to armor myself in reason and shrug this off as chance. I also wanted to go down the ladder and sit with the one creature who demanded nothing and yet asked everything. That evening, he let me stand closer than before. I could see the fine scallop of pattern on his breast, the way each feather held its own small universe of stripes and ash. He blinked, and the lids moved like slow curtains, and when they lifted, I felt steadier and undone at once. He took one step toward me, then another, precise as a man walking a church aisle. The wing nearest me eased open and brushed my sleeve with the softness of a secret. My breath hitched. I did not reach for him. I did not dare. He looked at me like I belonged to him. I said it in my head first, then heard my own mouth shape the words, low and shaken. "You are not just a bird, are you?" He answered with that round, brief note, a sound so simple it made my eyes sting. The notebook in my pocket felt heavier. He knows more than people. My grandpa's line had begun to live in my ribs, and I could not push it out. I wanted to put a clean bow on the night, to say that trust had grown by a finger's breadth, and that was enough. I almost closed the hatch. But before I did, he did a small, new thing. He lifted his head and gave 2 short beats of his wing toward the back wall, not the niche we had opened, another seam entirely. Dust rose in a thin veil. A draft kissed my cheek. The stones answered with a held breath I had not heard before. I ran the light along the mortar and saw nothing but age. I told him, yes, I told a wild owl I would look tomorrow. I told myself I was tired and it was only air and accident, that all this pointing and calling was in my mind. He watched me without a blink for a count of 10, and then lowered his head in that slow, minute nod that had already changed me. I slept poorly. Every time I turned, the creak came back. The wire, the little ribs under my hands, the sudden hush of wings turning cold air warm. In the morning, the neighbors' laughter hung in the yard like a rag on a nail. I made coffee and did not taste it. I told myself out loud that what I had seen could be arranged into sense: a hungry nightbird, a soft-hearted old man, a granddaughter with a thin skin, and a good imagination. I decided it was only my imagination, a story I was building because grief makes architects of us all. I said I would prove it by staying out of the shed for a day. I even put the key in a drawer and promised myself I would be practical. I had chores, I had bills, I had a life that did not include reading messages in the tilt of a wing. But that afternoon, the house grew too quiet, the kind of quiet that rings, and a single feather drifted down the stairwell from nowhere, turning lazily in the light like a slow snow. I caught it without meaning to. It was warm. I do not know how a feather can be warm. I stood there with the key back in my hand, my heart doing that broken drum beat in my chest, and I knew the day would not end the way I had planned. I told myself once more that all of this was a dream I would wake from with a laugh and a shake of the head. But the next day, everything changed. I decided to clean the cellar top to bottom, to turn dust into order, and put my heart back in its cage. I brought a broom, a bucket, a rag, and a stubborn plan. When I opened the hatch, he was already there, perched on the beam, still as a carved thing and twice as present. He did not take the chance to slip out into the day. He stayed. He watched. He made the room feel like a place with rules. I told myself it was just housekeeping. I told myself I would sweep, stack, breathe, and be done. I thought that would be the end of it. But the cellar had other plans. He shifted once, a careful step, as if to mark the beginning. I pulled everything into the light: broken jars, a coil of wire that made my stomach twist, a dented pail, a folded tarp that coughed dust like smoke. He did not flinch. He tracked me with that calm swivel, patient and exact, the way a librarian follows a child near a fragile shelf. When the broom scraped the corner by the back wall, he opened one wing, not wide, not warning, and let it fall. A small sign. My skin knew it before my head did. Behind 2 loose boards, I found a space I had not known was there. Cold air moved out to meet me as if it had been holding its breath for years. I slid the boards aside and set the light low. A shape waited, square and heavy, ironed at the edges. the top fitted with a black lock furred with rust. My hands went damp. I said my grandpa's name without meaning to, and the owl answered with a round, quiet note that made the hair on my arms rise. The lock was stubborn. I tugged, pried, swore, laughed at myself, and tried again. He watched, and then did a thing so small it felt like a whisper. He hopped down to the ladder, then to the floor, and walked 2 steps to the post near my knee. He tapped it once with his beak and looked at me. I ran my fingers along the post, found nothing, then felt a bump under a knot, a string, a key, old iron, cold and perfect in my palm. I looked up, and he held my eyes with that steady human patience that says, "Go on." The key turned like it had been waiting only for this exact minute. The lock fell into my hand with a weight that surprised me. Inside, the smell of paper and oil and winter. A knife with a wrapped handle like the one from the niche. A stack of photographs tied with twine. Letters in my grandpa's hand, folded so many times the creases had gone soft. And at the bottom, wrapped in cloth the color of the shed walls, a medallion. Old metal, the surface worn smooth except for one clean, stubborn line. An owl engraved there, head turned, eyes wide, feathers suggested by a few honest strokes. My chest hurt in the best and worst way. I pressed the cold disc to my palm and felt that strange double life of fear and peace. He shifted on the floor and lifted his head until we were eye to eye again. I understood the bird and my grandpa are bound forever. The photographs smelled like the tin box itself, snow to the sill. My grandpa in a hat too big for his ears, one hand on the shed door, the other out of sight, like he was holding something he did not want the camera to show, a blurred shape at his shoulder that could have been shadow or wing. In one picture, the door was cracked open tonight. In another, a bowl sat where I had set mine that morning, twin stones glinting at the bottom. The letters were not sermons. They were weather and fence repair and the price of feed, and then, in the middle of a paragraph about fixing a gate, a line that reached across, "He stayed with me the long night. I stayed with him the long winter. I wanted to put everything back and close the lid and keep the moment whole. I wanted to run my finger over the engraving until it warmed and kept warmth. I wanted to ask out loud what I was supposed to do with a truth that fit in my hand and in my life at the same time." He gave a breath I could feel and stepped onto the lowest rung of the ladder, taller now, closer. The cellar did not feel small anymore. It felt exact. I told myself this was the story's final piece. A medallion, a few letters, a proof I could touch and carry. I even pictured showing the neighbor the owl etched in metal and watching his mouth lose its joke. I thought that was enough. But when I traced the edge of the disc, my thumb caught on a thin groove along the rim. It was not decoration. It was a notch, a place made to fit into something else. The medallion was not only a symbol, it was a key again, or a seal, or a map I did not yet understand. I slid the medallion under my shirt because it felt wrong to leave it naked to the air. I tucked the photos back exactly as they had been tied. I laid the letters in a stack with their soft creases aligned. The knife went last, handle facing the same way my grandpa's hand would have wanted it. The lock closed with a small, honest click. The owl climbed back to the beam as if we had both fulfilled our part. I stood and the room swayed in that slow way grief and awe make time move. He blinked once, slow, then again. I could hear the creak under the fields, though there was no window to it. I could feel the weight of the medallion against my skin and the shape of the notch against my thumb. I thought this was the whole message. I thought I had learned what the dark wanted to teach me for one day. But as I set the box back in its hollow, my light skated across the floor and caught an old nail head in the mortar. The nail was not set like the others. It held a circle of leather worn thin by years of touch. When I lifted it, A small panel shifted and showed a second narrow space, long and shallow, just wide enough for something the size and shape of a coin on a chain. I did not open it, not yet. He lowered his head in that patient nod and waited, and I knew the seller still had one more word to speak. I stood with the medallion warm against my skin, and the little hidden panel still closed, and the room held its breath. He shifted on the beam and then did a thing I will feel in my bones as long as I live. He dropped to the ladder rung, then to the floor, and walked straight to me. Not a hop, not a test. He came with the calm of a decision already made. I froze and lowered my arm without thinking, sleeve pulled over my wrist the way my grandpa must have done, palm open, fingers quiet. He stepped onto me. The weight was real and careful, a firm set of talons that did not break skin, a balance light as smoke and heavy as trust. His toes found the bone and settled there like they had been taught where to stand. My heart climbed into my throat. I did not breathe for a count that felt like a lifetime. His body was close enough that the warmth of him reached through my sleeve. I felt a small, steady thrum that could only be a heartbeat, not my own. He lifted his head until his face was level with mine, and the room narrowed to 2 gold circles and the dark at their centers. There was no fear in them. There was patience and an old kind of knowing that made my knees want to give. My eyes blurred and spilled before I could stop them. I tried to laugh and choked instead. I said, barely a whisper, that I was here. He did not blink. He held me like a mirror made of night. I saw in them something I cannot put into words. It was not a trick of light. It was not a story I wanted to tell myself. It was a presence that carried both winter and shelter at once, a measure of judgment and mercy held in perfect tie. Gratitude rose in me so fast it hurt. I said my grandpa's name without sound and felt the medallion burn one clean circle against my chest like an answer. He shifted his weight, not away but closer, and the soft edge of his wing brushed my shoulder. I wept then, quiet and ugly and full, because I had the shameful thought that I did not deserve this, and the bright thought that it was not about deserving. He made a small, rounded note, the same one he had given me by the creek, and the seller answered with a held silence that belonged to cathedrals and snow. Then he opened his beak and let the sound grow. Not a long call rolled out for show, but a clean-shaped cry that fit the space and climbed the ladder and went through the wood and into the yard. It was not loud. It was exact. It found the night like a key finds a lock. I felt it go through me and out the open door. From the tree line came an answer. At first it was one voice, soft and far and sure, then another, to the left, then a third, lower, from the field edge by the old cottonwood. My skin woke along my arms. He turned his head and listened, and I realized I was holding my breath so hard my ribs hurt. He lifted from my arm with no haste and took the beam and then the doorway, and I followed because there was nothing else my feet could do. We stood in the yard, me on the grass, him on the fence post, the shed breathing behind us. He gave the call again, and this time the woods answered like a circle. Different throats, different distances, the same shaped word. Not alarm, not hunger, something like a roll call, something like a naming. I felt a line laid across the ground and through me, and for the first time since I was a child, I felt inside the world instead of pressed up against it. A shadow slipped low over the far hedge and curved to the pasture and back, a dark, soundless arc. Another perched at the top of the cottonwood and made a sound so soft it was more thought than voice. My breath shook and then steadied. I did not dare raise my hands. I did not dare move at all. He let out a shorter note, the small one he had used in the cellar when he wanted me to see, and a second shape peeled from the tree and drew near and then drew away again, a greeting that never touched. They were not there for me. They were there with him, and yet the circle widened an inch and made room. The oddest calm set in my chest, the kind that follows a sob when the body decides to live. I stood with damp cheeks and muddy cuffs and felt, with a certainty that did not ask permission, that I had been counted. It was not ownership. It was not adoption. It was a kind of acceptance that moved like water around a stone and took me in by doing nothing but being itself. He returned to my arm as easily as he had left it. The second landing felt like a seal pressed warm into wax. My hand shook and then learned not to. The night held. The calls thinned. The far voices faded back into trees and field and fence. He breathed once, deep, and the weight of him was the exact measure of what I could carry. I wanted to keep us there forever, to freeze the yard and the fence and the soft chorus and live inside that single minute of being recognized. I wanted to say, "This is the top of the mountain," and stop climbing. I thought this was the limit, but the ending would be stronger. Morning came so clean it almost rang, and I went to the shed humming because I had slept like a child who trusts the dark. I opened the door and breathed the cool earth and reached for the ladder by habit, ready to say good morning the way you do when a presence has become part of your day. I lowered the light and felt my heart drop through me. The cellar was empty. The beam was bare. The bowl sat where I had set it, water unbroken. The air did not move. He was gone. I said his name, which was not his name, just a sound that had come to mean him. It fell flat. I said my grandpa's name and waited as if paper might lift itself or a wing might draw a line through the dust. Nothing. The quiet was not a peace anymore. It was absence. It was a room that had once held a living heat and now held only the shape where it had been. I am not proud of what happened next. I cried the way you cry when you have been left before and thought you were safe from being left again. My whole body hurt with it. I pressed my palm to the ladder and hated the wood for not being a living thing. I hated the water for how still it was. I hated myself for believing I had been chosen when maybe I had only been convenient. I sat on the crate we had made a pew and felt ridiculous and holy and broken and angry all at once. I told myself reason had finally come to collect me. He was wild. Wild things leave. I repeated it until the words lost weight. I tried to stand and could not. I tried to laugh and choked on it. I tried to stop thinking like a child and failed. The shed held me with an indifference that felt cruel only because I wanted mercy. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand and made myself look straight at the ordinary, the beam, the wall, the shelf, the place where he had stood and stared into me until I told the truth, the place where trust had learned my name. I ran the light across the grain because doing anything was better than doing nothing. That is when I saw it. On the shoulder of the beam, just above where my head would rest if I leaned there, a mark had been cut. It was not a crack from age. It was not a careless scar. It was a clean, deliberate scratch made by something hard and certain. A single outline, simple as a child's drawing and exact as memory. A small body, a round head turned back over a shoulder, 2 wide circles for eyes. An owl, caught in one stubborn line. My heart stopped the way it had the first day under the hatch, and then found its beat again, hard and bright. I put my hand under the carving, but did not touch it. The beam felt warmer where the mark was. That is impossible. It felt warm. I stood there with tears still wet on my face and laughed without sound, because I understood. He had not vanished. He had left a seal. He had signed the room the way you sign a letter you intend someone to keep. I stepped back and the light caught the little panel I had not opened, and the nail with its circle of leather. I felt the medallion against my chest answer the seeing like a small pulse. My thumb found the notch on its rim again, the one that had made no sense. I eased the coin from the chain and set it into the shallow slot behind the loosened panel. It fit. I did not breathe. I turned it once to the left, as if some old part of me had always known where to turn. The panel yielded a finger's width and slid. Inside lay a folded scrap that had waited longer than I have been alive. My grandpa's hand again, smaller here, careful as prayer. If he leaves, it is because he trusts you to keep the door. Under that, 4 words I had seen and not understood. If he calls, listen. I laughed then, a raw sound that did not feel like laughter, because I could finally hear the shape of what had been given to me. It was not a pet. It was not a trick. It was a trust passed from warm hand to warm wing to warm hand again, a line of care you can feel, but not own. He had not left me a building. He had given me a way to belong. I climbed out into the daylight with the medallion hot in my fist, and the note in my pocket, and the mark burned into my mind. The yard looked the same. The neighbors said nothing, because they were not there yet to say their small, easy things. The sky was only sky. The world had not changed in any way you can weigh. And still, everything was different. The door between my body and the field had finally swung all the way open. The quiet in my chest was not empty anymore. It had a pulse. Days went by without him, and then a night came when the creek sang a thin song, and the cottonwood made its winter talk, and the shed breathed the old cool breath up the ladder, and I heard it, the rounded call, the one that sits inside your bones once you have heard it. One note, exact as a bell, not on the beam, not in the cellar, from the line of trees where the field begins. I went out without shoes because the ground was part of the message. He was not alone. He had never been alone. 2 shapes moved against the dark, then 3, then 1 broke from the black and skimmed the fence and did the half-turn that holds my heart like a coin. He did not come to my arm. He did not need to. He circled once, and the air touched my face the way a warm hand does when it says, enough words. He climbed and slipped back into the line, and I stood with my breath and my feet and my small human life and felt honored to be asked to keep the door. The animal showed me something that changed my whole life. This is the part that feels like a lie even as I say it plain. I still do not believe this happened to me. Things like this do not happen, but I saw it. I saw it myself. I felt the weight of him on my arm. I heard him call me into a winter no one else would have noticed. I watched him write his face into the wood where my grandfather's hand could find it from the other side of time. I was there when the circle widened and made room. If you too have met a miracle in the wild, write, "Animals remember kindness,"